Data collection and instruments come at the point where your study stops being an idea and becomes a plan for evidence. By the time you reach this step, you have already built the logic of the study. You have named the phenomenon, clarified the tension inside it, explained the consequence of leaving that tension unresolved, and identified the literature gap that shows what the field still does not know. You have selected a methodology, chosen a design, written a purpose statement, and written research questions that match the methodology and the design. Data collection comes next because now the question is no longer, what do I want to study? The question is, what evidence must exist in order for my research questions to be answerable? Data collection is the intentional gathering of evidence that directly answers the research questions. It is not collecting whatever is convenient, whatever is available, or whatever feels interesting. It is selecting the right kind of evidence from the right source, in the right way, so that the results are credible and the study is defensible. This is where alignment becomes visible. If your research questions are aligned but your data collection is not, the study collapses. Even a beautifully written purpose statement cannot save a project that collects the wrong kind of evidence. The anchor principle is simple. The research question dictates the data. The research question determines the type of knowledge you need. The type of knowledge determines the data type. The data type determines the instrument or source. And the instrument or source determines the collection procedure. If the study is quantitative, you need measurable variables and an instrument that produces numeric scores. If the study is qualitative, you need meaning-rich sources such as interviews, observations, or documents to capture lived experience, culture, story, or context. If the study is mixed methods, you need both plus a plan for how the strands will connect, build, or merge. Before you can select a quantitative instrument, you have to operationalize your constructs into variables. A construct becomes a variable only when it can be scored. That means you must be able to say exactly what the variable means, exactly how it will be measured, and exactly what numeric score will represent it in analysis. If you cannot produce a defensible score, you cannot test the research question or hypothesis. This is also where subscores matter. If you claim a construct with multiple dimensions, your instrument has to be able to reflect those dimensions through a defensible total score and valid subscale scores. You cannot claim you measured something broad and complex if your instrument cannot produce scores that match what you claimed. In quantitative research, an instrument is any tool that produces numeric data for a variable. That might be a survey scale, a standardized assessment, test scores, a rubric that yields numeric ratings, a structured observation tool that is scored consistently, or an existing database measure. Your instrument choice begins with the operational definition because that is what ties the instrument to the variable. Once the variable is defined, you select an instrument that matches the construct structure you are claiming. If you claim a broad construct that has multiple dimensions, the instrument must support that claim through valid subscales or subscores. If your research questions require more than one dimension, the instrument must produce those separate scores in a defensible way. Otherwise, you are not measuring what you said you were measuring. Quantitative instruments must also be chosen with analysis in mind. Your scores need enough variability to detect relationships or differences. Your sample size needs to be appropriate for the analysis you plan to run, and the level of measurement must match the statistical test. If your quantitative research question uses the verb relationship and your analysis aligns with correlation, you need two measured variables that produce appropriate numeric scores. If your question uses predict and aligns with regression, you need a predictor measure and an outcome measure that can be scored properly. If your question uses association and aligns with chi-square, both variables must be categorical with clearly defined categories. If your question uses statistically significant difference and aligns with t-tests or the ANOVA family, you must have a grouping variable that defines groups clearly and an outcome variable that can be compared meaningfully across those groups. If you choose to create your own survey rather than using an established instrument, you take on additional dissertation-level work because you must justify the development, defend the scoring structure, and address reliability and validity in a way that stands up to scrutiny. That is not impossible, but it is a heavier lift, and students should make that choice intentionally. Qualitative data collection is different because qualitative research is designed to capture meaning, experience, culture, story, and context. Qualitative sources might include interviews, focus groups, observations, field notes, documents, artifacts, participant journals, and researcher-reflexive journals. The most important rule is that qualitative sources are not chosen because they are easy. They are chosen because each one gives you a particular kind of access to meaning, and your design requires the right kind of access. Interviews are best when you need depth, privacy, and nuance. They are especially strong when the phenomenon is personal, emotional, sensitive, or tied to identity. Interviews are also ideal when your design depends on the participant's own language, because they allow a participant to describe experience without group pressure. Interviews fit naturally with phenomenology, because phenomenology prioritizes lived experience and meaning as described in the participant's words. They also fit well with narrative work because narrative research centers on the story, the sequence of events, and the meaning people construct as they tell what happened. Focus groups are best when you need shared meaning and social interaction. They help you see how people agree, disagree, build on one another's ideas, and reveal group norms. Focus groups can be powerful when the phenomenon is collective, such as shared experiences inside a program or shared perceptions of a policy. At the same time, focus groups are not ideal for deeply personal topics because participants may conform to the group, avoid vulnerability, or be influenced by dominant voices. Focus groups are useful when the group dynamic is part of what you need to understand, but they require careful facilitation and thoughtful topic choice. Observations are best when what people do matters as much as what they say. They allow you to see routines, interaction patterns, practices, and culture in action. Observation is essential in ethnography because ethnography is about cultural patterns and shared meaning that lives in behaviors, rituals, norms, and routines. Observation also strengthens case study because a case study is about understanding a bounded system in context, and what happens in that system cannot be captured through interviews alone. Observation gives you evidence of the environment and the practice, not only the participants' interpretation of it. Documents and artifacts are best when the story of the phenomenon is stored in records that the system has produced. That might include policies, lesson plans, student work, meeting notes, professional development materials, training documents, emails, manuals, or program artifacts. Documents are powerful because they anchor claims in evidence beyond memory. They show what was officially intended, what was communicated, and what the system valued. Documents are especially important for case study, because case study expects you to understand the case through multiple forms of evidence, not only through participant perspectives. Qualitative rigor also requires protocols. Interviews require an interview guide aligned to the research question and design, so that the conversation consistently gathers evidence relevant to the study. Observations require an observation protocol, so you can defend what you looked for and how you captured it. Documents require selection criteria, so you can justify why those texts or artifacts count as evidence in your study. Protocols protect credibility because they keep your data collection systematic rather than random. Qualitative design should guide source selection. Narrative research relies on participant stories over time, often supported with artifacts such as timelines or personal documents that help reconstruct the story. Phenomenology relies heavily on in-depth interviews and participant words because the goal is to understand lived experience and its meaning. Ethnography relies on prolonged engagement, observation, field notes, and cultural artifacts that reveal group norms and shared meaning. Case study focuses on a bounded system and typically relies on triangulation through multiple sources, commonly interviews, observations, and documents or artifacts. Grounded theory relies on iterative data collection and memoing because the goal is to capture a developing process and build an explanatory model rooted in participant experience. Mixed methods data collection requires both quantitative and qualitative evidence, and it requires integration to be planned rather than treated as an afterthought. Integration should be visible at the design stage, the data collection stage, the analysis stage, and the interpretation stage. Mixed methods becomes weak when integration is only mentioned at the end, because then the study reads like two separate projects rather than one integrated design. In explanatory sequential mixed methods, quantitative data is collected first and qualitative data is collected second to explain the quantitative results. Integration often happens by connecting, where the quantitative results determine what the qualitative phase focuses on. In exploratory sequential mixed methods, qualitative data is collected first and quantitative data follows to test, extend, or refine what emerged qualitatively. Integration often happens by building, where the qualitative findings shape the instrument or variables used in the quantitative phase. In convergent mixed methods, both sets of data are collected in parallel, and integration happens through merging, where results are brought together for comparison at interpretation. The mixed methods research question should make the integration plan visible by clarifying how the strands relate and what the study learns only when both are combined. Triangulation strengthens the credibility of findings by confirming meaning through more than one data source, perspective, or method. Triangulation is especially important in qualitative research and is typically expected in case study because the purpose is to understand a case in depth and in context. Case study commonly relies on at least 3 distinct sources of evidence, often interviews, observations, and documents or artifacts, so that claims can be cross-checked and deepened. Triangulation is not about collecting more data, just to collect more data. It is about strengthening the trustworthiness of interpretation by showing that your conclusions are supported across sources, not built on a single viewpoint. Ethics and feasibility must shape every data collection plan. Data collection must be ethical, legally appropriate, and respectful. That includes informed consent, confidentiality, minimizing harm, secure storage, and clear boundaries. Access also matters. You must be able to recruit participants, obtain permissions, and legally obtain any institutional data you plan to use. Feasibility is a real constraint, but it cannot become the driver of design if it breaks alignment. The research question determines what evidence is needed, and then the job is to find an ethical and feasible way to collect it. There are predictable mistakes students make in this phase. One mistake is choosing instruments before operationalizing variables, which leads to scores that do not match what the study claims. Another is selecting surveys that do not produce defensible subscores when subscores are needed. Another is using unvalidated scales without justification, and then making claims the instrument cannot support. Another is collecting qualitative data that does not match the design, such as running a focus group when the study requires deep individual lived experience, or relying only on interviews in a study that should include observation and documents. Another is having no integration plan for mixed methods, and treating the qualitative and quantitative phases like separate projects. Another is collecting far too much data, without a clear plan to analyze it. Another is collecting data because it is convenient rather than because it answers the question. The correction is always the same. Return to alignment. Make sure the research question dictates the evidence dictates the source, and the source dictates a clear procedure. Data collection and instruments are where alignment becomes visible. The right data makes the research questions answerable. The wrong data makes even a strong design collapse. When your research questions, variables or experiences, instruments or sources, collection procedures, and analysis plans are aligned, the study becomes defensible, credible, and doable.